Hello, everyone. I'm happy to see you all today. My name is Dmitry Abakumov. I'm the chair of this seminar, and I'm glad to welcome all of you at our fourth international seminar on computational educational sciences. Our seminar is aimed at building the research community and thinking together on challenging problems at the intersection of education, quantitative research, and computational science. Our seminar is hosted by the Center for Computational Educational Sciences of HEC University Moscow. And today I am grateful to our speaker, Dr. Jacqueline Wong, for her acceptance to present at our seminar. Jacqueline works at the Delft University in the Netherlands, and I'm excited to have her talk on examining the use of prompts to facilitate self-regulated learning in massive open online courses. But before giving Jacqueline the virtual microphone, I would like to inform you, all of you, about the seminar plan. So we will start with 35 minutes presentation from Jacqueline, and then we have around 40 minutes for questions and open discussion. There are two options to ask the question, so you can use both of these options. The first one is you can type the question in an open chat and I will voice this question in this case. And the second option, you can use the raise hand button and I will give you the virtual microphone and you can ask your question orally. A gentle suggestion, if possible, please your web cameras please use your web cameras on during the seminar to provide the kind of feeling of a real physical audience, because we miss this, already miss for 1 year, these feelings of real physical audience. And thank you very much for understanding. Well, now please join me in warm welcoming Jacqueline at our virtual stage. Jacqueline, you are very welcome.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. I'm just going to share the screen. Okay. Nice to see all of you today. And hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share in this space. So my name is Jacqueline, and I'm from the Erasmus University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Although at this moment, I'm also working on my postdoc at the Delft University in the Netherlands, and my PhD project is funded by the Leiden Delft Erasmus Center for Education and Learning. Our research has a big focus on educational technology. So you can find out more about all our other research projects on the website that's on this slide. So today's talk will be on a recently published paper in the Journal of Computers in Human Behavior. And together with my project supervisors, Martina Baas, Björn de Kooning, and Fred Paz, we conducted a series of 3 experiments based on 3 MOOCs to examine the effect of prompting as an approach to enhance self-regulated learning, course engagement, and performance in massive open online courses. So before I begin, just to give you an overview of the talk, I've divided this talk in 3 parts. So first, I'll give a brief theoretical background related to the study. Then I'll share the findings of the study. And finally, we'll talk about the results and some of the future directions. So during this whole talk, please feel free to ask any questions, stop me at any moment, or you can use the chat and ask some questions. I hope that we can make this a little bit more interactive. So just to start and to begin, I would like to invite you to use the chat and type in what you think makes some learners more successful when learning online. You can think about what do they typically do or what characteristics do they have that makes them successful online learners. Yeah, I see high motivation, indeed. Interest in the subject, probably. Maybe we can have one last response. Yeah, so we have quite a number of responses here, and money, of course, but today we are talking about open online education. So these courses are offered at very little cost or no cost. So it is a good way, it makes education more accessible. I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later on. But as far as I'm concerned, all these characteristics that's mentioned in the chat do fall under a very broad concept of self-regulated learning. And later on, I'm going to talk about what exactly self-regulated learning is, the model that I'm using, and also link to reasons why it's important to support self-regulated learning in online learning environments such as MOOCs. So firstly, we talk about money just now, but online learning offers learners many benefits. The benefits includes making education accessible because learners do not have to be physically attending a class at a fixed location or in a specific location. Another benefit is that it makes learning very flexible because it gives learners a high level of control over their learning. So learners can interact with as many course items as they like, or they can do as little as they want. They can also repeat the course materials that they have difficulty understanding or skip certain videos when they are bored. So online learning potentially can increase the interactivity of learning because learners can use discussion forums, they can use emails. So for example, when we're having this Zoom meeting here, you can either use the microphone or you can type in the chat. So there are different ways to interact. And learners can also use additional resources from other places to supplement their learning. However, even as we are currently placed in this situation where remote learning is the default, many learners are struggling. So from this newspaper article that I've just taken from in the Netherlands, many students are realizing that online learning is challenging. They find that they're not doing as well as they would in on-campus course. And some of these reasons that the students mention is about procrastination. So perhaps they left their work all the way to the end and realize that they can't finish it on time. And some of them realize that it's too easy to multitask. They get distracted easily by all the other tabs or things that are happening at home. Therefore, while online learning can be beneficial, not all learners benefit from online learning. And researchers argue that online learning demands learners to self-regulate their learning. So what exactly is self-regulated learning? Self-regulated learning is an umbrella term to refer to a learning process that is self-directed and active. So while there are many models of self-regulated learning, this model that I'm showing you here is Zimmerman's model of self-regulated learning that I follow in my studies. And it describes these three statistical phases. So starting with the forethought phase, learners are engaged in two main processes before they start on a task. And this is task analysis and self-motivational beliefs. So a self-regulated learner in this phase, they will set goals, they will plan for their study. So some of you mentioned, like in the chat, someone mentioned that the skill of planning is really important for online learning. And moving on to the second phase, you have the performance phase. This occurs during the task. What do the learners actually do? So learners, ideally, they will follow their plan, make use of certain learning strategies to learn, such as self-explanation or test themselves again. And a self-regulated learner in this phase will also decide on choosing a quiet place to study so that they can focus. So during this phase, learners will also monitor how well they are learning. And after the performance phase, learners enters this self-reflection phase, and they will be involved in the processes of self-judgment and reaction. So they'll think about what do they need to do next? Should they continue reviewing or should they move on to the next topic? So as you can see here, self-regulated learning covers a lot of concept and is influential in education to explain the factors that contribute to learning success. I'm just sharing with you a figure here in one of my previous studies. We look at the learner clusters that were identified in papers that examine learner clusters in massive open online courses. So as you can see in the figure, we can broadly categorize the learners in three groups, depending on their engagement with the videos and the assessments on the two axes. So starting at the bottom corner, most of the learners in MOOCs actually fall into these clusters. They have very low engagement with assessments and videos, and they also tend to drop out of the MOOCs. And moving on to the middle portion, you have 3 different clusters. So one cluster, we call them the system gamers in one of the papers. And system gamers only interact with quizzes. And at the other end, you have the auditors who look at only videos. And in the middle, you have the learners who are partially engaged, but they still do not finish everything in the MOOCs. And at the top corner, we have a group of learner clusters with high engagement level. However, apart from the unshaded portion, you have the perfect learners, keen completers, and completers. And apart from them, you have the late completer and the nearly there clusters. So apart from the 3 clusters that's not shaded, all the rest can be considered as not quite there yet and not that successful. So based on the findings of the low completion rate in MOOCs and the diverse learner classes that we can see here that are not that successful, it seems like some form of support is needed to help learners to become more active, to engage more in their learning process, to guide themselves into completing the courses that they enroll in. Because in MOOCs, we assume that most of the time learners are interested in certain topic. That's why they sign up for it. So one key issue in research concerns how do we measure self-regulated learning? So by definition, self-regulated learning involves behavioral engagement. Therefore, we would like to identify learner behavior from trace data as proxies for self-regulated learning. And one of the fascinating things about online environment is that we get so much data, but what do these data mean about learners' learning process is still a question. So for those of you who are familiar with studies in online environment, you have Kuchelek and colleagues who suggested that high self-regulated learners often repeat course materials, and also some studies that shows that learner behavior, such as reading course introduction materials, completing course items are related to self-regulated learning. So adopting all these measurements that have been used in other studies, and for example, you can look at the slide on the left-hand side, you have Janssen and colleagues, they identified a set of behaviors from the trace data as proxies for self-regulated learning. In our study, on the right-hand side, we also adopted a few of this behavior that we like to match with the theory. So for our study, we identified 4 proxies of self-regulated learning that we would be measuring in the study. So we operationalize planning as the number of access to the course introductory materials. And this includes watching course introduction videos, visiting course overview and weekly course information page. So when we are operationalizing all this behavior, we would have to think from a learner's perspective. So when they approach this environment, what are the things that they would do that would support them in their planning? And the second proxy is for self-monitoring, specifically on grades. So we looked at the number of page views that the learners made to the grade information page, because that will give them information of how well they're doing. And this allows them to monitor their progress towards course completion. Finally, we have the 2 other proxies, which is time management and self-reflection. And these behaviors are operationalized by the proportion of course items that were completed, but on a different dimension. For time management, it is the proportion that were completed on time. And for self-reflection, it's the proportion of completed course items that they were repeated. So we assume that learners, they would repeat certain course items when they are reflecting, because in an online course, you have a lot of videos and sometimes information is transient in a video, and you would need to repeat certain videos in order for you to enhance your understanding. So I've so far given you the background on the theory of self-regulated learning and also talk about the measurement of self-regulated learning. And now I'm going to go formal into the study that we've conducted. But before I move on, do we have any questions? All good? Okay, so I have a question here. For self-monitoring, have I considered self-reports or learning experiences? Indeed, I think we can look at self-reports of learning experiences, but when there is also the question of when you ask students to self-report their self-monitoring, is that an intervention in itself? Because you're asking them to think about whether they are self-monitoring. And hence, yeah, so a measurement can also become an intervention in that sense, I guess. But indeed, I would say that self-monitoring can also be measured in the form of self-reports, or in that sense, self-regulated learning. A lot of concepts, for example, MSLQ, which is quite a commonly used self-report measure to measure self-regulated learning. However, in this study, we are focusing on the behavioral measurement instead of self-reported measurement. I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
Okay, let me move on to the next part on the study design. So this study was conducted in massive open online courses, which is also known as MOOCs, and anywhere anyone can enroll for almost free. And with the permission of the instructors of the 3 MOOCs, Serious Gaming, Econometrics, and Innovation Management, and the help of the Coursera partner support team, we created 3 versions for each MOOC so that we can randomly assign the learners to one of the 3 conditions when they enroll in the MOOCs. So we started with the first experiment in a Serious Gaming MOOC, and we replicated this experiment in 2 other MOOCs in order for us to see how whether these results can be replicated. This allows us to also take into account the similarities and the differences in the 3 MOOCs. The MOOCs, they were similar in the sense that they consisted of a number of videos, readings, and assessments. So it's a lot of self-paced learning. Therefore, like many of the online learning environment, learners have to plan, they manage their time, and they have to rely a lot on themselves in order to succeed in the course. However, there are also certain differences. For example, the course length and the total number of course items. So if we divide the total number of course items by the number of weeks, econometrics would seem the most effortful to complete because it has the highest number of course items to be completed each week. And this will be followed by Serious Gaming, then Innovation Management. Also, econometrics MOOC did not have discussion prompts on the topics taught, and all of the assignments were peer-reviewed. So peer-reviewed assignments take a lot more effort to complete than automated quiz. And while Serious Gaming's MOOC had discussion prompts, there's also a balance of automated quizzes and peer assignments. And finally, Innovation Management MOOC has assignments placed only in alternate weeks. Therefore, you can see that these 3 MOOCs are structured in quite a different manner. Now we'll talk about the intervention. So our intervention was designed as videos because videos were the most interactive form of course material and the main form of content delivery in MOOCs. And we examined 2 forms of prompting. The first type involves question only, and we abbreviated it as SRLQ. In this condition, learners received the prompt videos with 3 questions that aim at planning, monitoring, and self-reflection. The questions are intended to raise learners' self-awareness of their current state of learning. For example, am I setting goals to ensure that I have a good understanding of the course material? And after each question prompt, an in-video question appears asking learners to respond from a scale of not at all to all the time. And learners' response were not collected because all these responses were welcome. So if learners responded as not at all, ideally the response would trigger actions that will remediate this gap. So am I supposed to set goals? Maybe set goals will help me to organize my thoughts a little better. But if learners responded with all the time, they can also move on with their learning process knowing that, oh, setting goals, I've been doing this all the while. And in the other condition, we examine the effect of recommending activities on self-regulated learning in addition to the questions prompting self-regulated learning. So this is an extension of the first condition by adding the recommendations corresponding to the prompts. So for example, set clear learning goals on what you want to learn and make a plan to achieve them. The idea of the recommendation is to give learners the extra support by directly telling them what activities will be helpful for them. So to put everything into perspective with self-regulated learning theory, so I think it's important that things are tied together in such a sense that this intervention was designed to support the 3 phases of self-regulated learning. And these prompts were placed in every week of the course so that learners were reminded to perform self-regulated learning activities to enhance their learning every week. Also, the measurements that I've mentioned in the previous section, these are also based on theory and intervention. So we expected that learners were prompted to be more engaged in planning, monitoring, and reflection, as well as better time management because of the enhanced self-regulated learning. Okay, so we performed two types of analysis in this experiment. The first analysis is known as the intention to treat, where we compare all active learners in the three conditions. But it's important to note that when we compare it all active learners, learners in the prompted condition, the SRLQ and the SRLQR, they included learners who did not view any of the prompt videos. So those who view and did not view are all grouped into one paper. But in the second analysis, we compared only active learners in the control condition to the learners in the prompted conditions that watched at least one prompt video. So this analysis is known as the treatment on treated. And due to the violation of assumption of normality, we carry out two types of statistical tests, the robust ANOVA with 20% trim means, as well as a non-parametric Kruskal-Wallis to double check our analysis. I have a question at this point. So someone in the chat says that in the Janssen paper, they included help seeking as a self-regulated learning behavior. Why you did not include it in your study? Well, there are possibly a lot of reasons that I can give. I think one of it is that you can actually include as many measurements as you want, but tying it with intervention, we want to look at how this intervention actually supported specific aspects of the self-regulated learning, because the concept is kind of broad. And in our prompts, we are raising awareness on the aspects of planning, monitoring, and self-reflection, and not help seeking. So that's possibly the biggest reason why we didn't include all the different types of trace data measurements in our study. Okay. So this table summarizes the overall results across the three experiments. As you can see, the intention to treat analysis did not yield much significant results, except the first experiment, which surprised us that the control condition seemed to have completed more course items on time than learners in the question prompt condition. But bear in mind, this condition that we've compared included learners who watched and didn't watch the prompt videos. And this result is actually reversed in the treatment on treated analysis. So the results in serious gaming MOOC showed that learners in the condition that received the question-only prompts had higher access to a number of measured outcomes, including course preparatory item, higher proportion of course item completed on time, higher engagement in the course, which is measured by two, operationalized in two ways. One, it's the proportion of course items that's accessed, and the average number of course items assessed per active day. And they also receive higher course grades than learners in the control condition. Similar effects that we found in the serious gaming MOOCs was also replicated in the econometrics MOOC, which is the third experiment. And in addition to the positive results from the question-only prompt, learners who watched the prompt questions with recommendations were also had positive effects. So, but in the second experiment with innovation management MOOCs, the positive effects of the question and recommendation was only found for two aspects of the four proxies of self-regulated learning activities that we've measured. So it's course item completed on time and course items that were completed that were repeated. So learners who watched the self-regulated learning prompt and question and recommendation videos, they actually did better, performed better in this sense than the control condition. So while the results in the three experiments were somewhat inconsistent, we did find some consistency in the course items completed on time as an effect of prompting self-regulated learning with questions and recommendations. So this brings us to, okay, now we have these insights, but then we can explore it a little further by using process mining. So we did an exploratory analysis using an available software called Disco, and you can actually download with an academic license for free if you are associated with an institution. So this software provides us with statistics from our data. It allows us to filter for activities and sequences of interest. So given our quantitative analysis shows that course items completed on time across the 3 experiments were kind of consistent, let's focus on how these items were completed on time and whether there are differences between the conditions. So this top figure, this is from Serious Gaming MOOC. The top figure shows the numbers we have before we apply the filter. So we have 254 learners in total across all the conditions and 10,561 access to the course items. When we filter for completed items on time, we only get 195 of these learners who completed at least one course item on time. And together, they have 2,338 of such events of course items that were completed on time. So in our exploration, we looked at 5 groups of learners. So learners in the control condition, learners in the question-only condition who viewed and not viewed the prompt video. So they are the viewers and non-viewers, and learners in the question and recommendation condition who also viewed and not viewed the prompt videos. And the first observation that we looked at was the average number of access to complete course items on time. From the Serious Gaming MOOC in the first experiment, the highest average access to complete course items on time was by the group of learners who viewed at least one prompt video with question only. So apart from the statistics, we also look at the process maps that we generated for the 5 groups to visualize the data. So the process maps were compared by making 3 types of observation. So first, the distribution of access to complete course item on time across the weeks. And this indicated by the shade of color in each week. So the darker the shade, the higher the access of course items completed on time is for that week. And the second observation is the percentage of learners who started in week 1 and ended in week 1, indicated on the process map by the green dotted lines and the red dotted lines. And finally, the sequences of assessing to complete the course items on time by looking at the pubs that's indicated by the arrows to let us know what is the sequence of the learner's activity. So given the limited time we have, I'll only discuss some of the findings in each experiment. So in this slide, the 5 process maps were generated from the Serious Gaming MOOC in a control condition. Higher number of access to complete course item on time was observed in week 1, 2, and 6. So you can see the darker shade of blues here. But for the non-viewers in the prompted condition, in the top 2 figure, you can see that the higher access to complete course item on time was only observed in week 1. And similarly, in the bottom corner right, you have the question and recommendation condition. Higher access to complete course item on time was observed in week 1 and 2, but not in week 6. So these are kind of different from the control condition. However, in the question-only condition, the high access to complete course item was observed in week 1, 2, 3, and 6. This gives us, well, we can't have a firm conclusion on this, but it does suggest that perhaps learners have higher access over the course weeks, showing better time management and better, higher persistence in terms of regulation of their own learning. And just to give a comparison with the second experiment on innovation management MOOC, this is a 9-week MOOC and with roughly the same number of course items. So in the control condition, high access to complete course item on time was observed in week 1 to week 5, week 8 to week 9. But this is not the case for the prompt condition. So it suggests that maybe prompting to support self-regulated learning wasn't as helpful as the other 2 MOOCs. And it also means that perhaps it is not just the more active learners are viewing the prompts and benefiting from it. So I would also like to share some findings from the third experiment in econometrics MOOC. So the table shows that both conditions, when learners watch at least one of the prompt videos, the average access to complete course item on time was higher than control condition, so 24 versus 14. So unlike the other 2 experiments, the prompt non-viewers in the other 2 experiments had generally low access to complete course items on time. But in econometrics MOOC, the non-viewers, they were assessing to complete the course items on time in the first 2 weeks, so they're generally quite active. And when comparing all these 5 process maps, learners in the question-only prompt condition who viewed the prompt videos, so they are the viewers, they have more access to complete the course items in the first 3 weeks, as shown by the red box. So yeah, so this is similar to the serious gaming MOOC, where it suggests that perhaps they are more active and it supported them throughout more course weeks than the other conditions. And another observation that we make is the number of learners who started and ended their learning process in week 1. Just to give an example. So in all 3 experiments, we found that the percentage of learners who started and ended in week 1, they are very high, and it's aligned with previous studies in MOOCs, which shows that there is high attrition rate. But taking experiment 3, the econometrics MOOCs, for example, the highest percentage is observed in the non-viewers in the question and recommendation condition. In this example, you can see that 193 started in week 1, but 180 ended their process in week 1. This is a percentage of 93%. And the lowest percentage was in the condition where learners viewed the question and recommendation videos. So you have 374 learners who started in week 1, 261 who ended in week 1. So this is about 70% of the learners who ended their process. And one last finding that I would like to share concerns the sequence of access to complete course items on time. So in econometrics MOOC, we can see that the optional course items. So I think sometimes we have to interpret our results in terms of the context of the learning environment. So in econometrics MOOCs, for week 8, the instructors have placed optional course materials to help learners gain prerequisite knowledge to refresh their knowledge before they start the course. So one of the helpful sequence that we expect from the learners would be going from week 1 to week 8 and back to week 1 to begin the course with the additional knowledge. So this is indeed what we observe, right? For many learners went from week 1 to week 8, and while others proceed from week 1 to week 2 instead of going to week 8. But in the control conditions, we have some learners going from week 8 to week 2 without going back to week 1. So this is a deviation from what we expect. And across the 3 experiments, we also observed that learners who viewed the prompt videos, they tend to be more sequential. So they follow the MOOCs in a more linear manner from week 1 to week 2 to week 3. And it could also be because MOOCs, or those that we are looking at this moment, they are structured in such a way that it's linear progression of knowledge. So they want learners to go from week 1 to week 2 as well, because that is how they have structured the course content. And that's why learners who follow this course content are more likely to understand what's going on a little bit better and complete the MOOCs. So coming to the end, based on the findings, we can conclude that prompting self-regulated learning with questions is generally helpful. This is also aligned with previous studies in that examine prompting in online learning environment. Some benefits of prompts includes the feasibility and ease of implementation, because it can be easily added to existing course materials instead of having a widget that learners have to download or having additional technological features to embed in the environment. However, this effectiveness is dependent on whether learners interacted with the prompt, as shown by the differences in the intention to treat and treatment on treated analysis. So future studies should probably look at how we can design prompts in such a way that more learners will interact with it, and yet it's not too intrusive to the learning process, because you want learners to have a flow in their learning process as well. And by taking them out of this learning process could have negative effects on learning. Second point, the results of the 3 experiments show that the effectiveness of the type of prompt differed in the 3 MOOCs. So while both types of prompts are found to be effective in econometrics MOOCs, it is not that much effective in innovation management. And in serious gaming MOOC, question-only prompt was found to be more effective than a control-only condition. So we thought that one of these possible reasons could be the extent of self-regulated learning that's demanded of the learners in this MOOC. So we've mentioned previously, econometrics MOOC was probably the most demanding, with the most number of course items that learners need to complete in a week, and might require a higher level of self-regulated learning for learning from learners. So one direction for future studies would be to design experiments in which they can account for both these differences in the learning environment. What do the learning environment expect the students to do, as well as the differences in the learners? So perhaps some learning environment demands greater extent of self-regulated learning, and perhaps some learners need more support for self-regulated learning than the others. And lastly, using process mining as an exploration, helped us to examine sequences of learner activity over course weeks. And this helped us to better understand self-regulation in terms of completing course item on time. So as mentioned, self-regulated learning is a broad concept, and this can be further explored at other levels of details. For example, per study session, how does learners self-regulate? Or within a course week, how do they move from one course item to another course items, like the transitions found in some of the literature, and looking at task strategies like monitoring. So if we want to focus on monitoring, what kind of behavior do we expect when learners are monitoring? And what kind of information can we get from the online system? So I think one future direction is to continue to explore different types of analysis, or to develop analysis that can help us bridge this gap between theory and measurement. So just like learning cannot be directly observed but we can use performance as an indicator of learning. So if there is an increase in performance, it shows that learners probably have learned something. So we can also ask ourselves, what behavioral indicator of self-regulated learning are there in an online environment? And how can we better measure this without, in combination with self-reports probably, or other ways of measuring? So with this, I've come to the end of my presentation, and I would also like to acknowledge my team of supervisors and people who has helped me in one way or another to make this study possible. So thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for this great job, for this paper, and for this fantastic presentation. So I was excited to hear this, and I hope, and not hope, I'm pretty sure all the audience had the same experience. So, okay, we have questions. And as I told before, I will voice questions which are in chat. So, of course, you can read these questions by yourself, but I will voice it for a video version of this seminar, which we will place on YouTube. Okay, the first question is from Anastasia. What criteria were used to select the indicators of self-regulated learning?
Okay, I think the criteria were not explicit, but it was based on theoretical implications. So we look at what based on Zimmerman's model especially. So we look at Zimmerman's model, we look at our intervention, and we try to match the intervention. So when we talk about setting goals and planning, and it's grouped under task analysis. So it's a combination of also looking at the learning environment. So if there is no goal-setting activity, the goal-setting activity is done outside the environment, and there's no way we can measure this goal-setting activity from the traces that we collect in this environment. Therefore, by taking into account what can we get from the online environment, based on theory, what do we expect learners to do? And our intervention, what kind of effect would it have on the behavior of self-regulated learning? And that's how we selected the measurements.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. The next couple of questions are from Grigory. So he's asking, how long did the experiments last? Have you planned the time in advance? And what sample size did you expect to get by the end of the experiment? And may I extend this question? So I think that it would be very interesting to get an idea how you thought when you planned this experiment. So in terms of time, in terms of sample size, and so on and so on. Could you please share these preparatory movements?
Okay, I think it would be nice to have a power analysis to know the sample size that we would like to collect in advance. But I think in this MOOC environment, and being in one of the first experiments that we are conducting in MOOCs, because literature is really scarce in how interventions can be conducted in MOOCs, we had a preparation thinking that what is a feasible timeline to collect the data. So we had this plan in advance. We have discussions with the course instructors and looking at the planning. I mean, you can't go on collecting data and letting it run forever. You have to have like a time frame for it. So we made the decision that we will collect the data across 3 cohorts for each MOOC to make sure that we have a standardized, comparable set of data. So that's, and I think that was our decision for. So for each experiment, so for each cohort, we collected the data from the beginning of time of enrollment till the end of the course date. So we have, because in the data, it doesn't show you like whether it's on time or not. So when we are processing the data, we have to use the time or the recommended pace that was given in the MOOC environment and match it with the data. So we have to look at when should learners, so for example, the first week of the course, we need to state the time of the first week of the course and look at timestamp in which learners complete the course and process it as whether it's on time or not on time. So these are some of the things that we had to process the data after we've collected the raw data from Coursera. And the sample size, well, depending on the MOOCs, because the 3 MOOCs are from different fields and different disciplines. So econometrics is one of our more popular MOOCs at Erasmus. So you have higher enrollment, whereas serious gaming was more specific to a smaller group of interested learners. Therefore, the number of learners were a little smaller in serious gaming MOOCs. Have I answered all the questions?
I think, yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is from Evgeny. He's asking, first, thank you for your presentation. And he's asking, do you control that those who engage with prompts aren't more motivated than those who don't? Can't this be the real cause of better performance? And the second question from him is, have you ever studied which type of questions or recommendations on planning, monitoring, or reflecting has a stronger effect on students' performance?
Okay, great questions. So for the first question, we did control for student motivation. So I didn't share the results over here, but we did make sure that it was randomized across the 3 conditions, that there are no differences in the 3 conditions in terms of autonomous and controlled motivation. So there was a self-report, there was a pre-course survey in which we placed within the course itself, that looks at learner motivation to make sure that they are randomized across the 3 conditions, and that these 3 conditions do not have like learners that, there is no accident that learners in one condition is more motivated than the other. So then for the second question, if we studied which type of recommendations or questions had a stronger effect on student performance, we based this on previous literature. So a lot of our prompts and recommendations were actually adapted from Zimmerman and Eli's 2010 study. So, and we looked at whether it's a cognitive or a metacognitive prompt, and how would this, and if we want to support all 3 phases, how can these questions be formulated, and what kind of recommendations would match these prompts? And that's how we came up with the video and with the 3 different types of prompts as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next question is from Daria. Thank you. What the duration of the SRL prompt video was? Table 2 in your article shows that the SRL prompt videos views shows of the SRL prompts video views of students. Coursera data has 2 events of video views, started viewing and finished viewing. Which of the events did you use in your studies when counting views?
So to keep the videos really short, we have it only 1 minute. So we designed the videos to be just 1 minute or slightly over 1 minute. So plus minus within the 1 minute range. And for the data that we use finished viewing. So we want students to at least reach the end of the video in order for us to consider it as they have viewed the video or watched the video. Because if they are just at the beginning, they wouldn't have probably interacted or looked at least some of the prompts or some of the questions or recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next question is, from Ekaterina. Thank you for the interesting report and research. My question is about the prompting SRL. Have you considered requiring students to watch a video with questions so more people can watch it? I mean, such an access format in which the next video is available only after watching the previous one. And how do you think this could or not change the results of the study? Thanks.
Okay, I think it has a lot to do with the format in Coursera as well. And there is really, this is really an interesting question on how can we develop other forms of intervention so that more learners are exposed to what we think would be beneficial, right? So in Coursera, the video starts playing so we place this video after the first content video, because in Coursera, when learners start with first content video, the second video would actually play continuously. So if you do not have, so there are two ways. So it either plays continuously or you can click on it. And that's why we place it on the second content video instead of first, because sometimes learners might not want to click on activities that are out of the course content itself. So they look at the, so we titled the videos as supporting your learning, but we're not sure if learners would be keen to actually take such an initiative to support themselves. So we put it in the second content video and hope, and the intention is that if learners actually, is to increase the interaction that learners would have with the videos. And yeah, so the compliance rate is really a problem that we face in Coursera. But I think in this experiment, we managed to have at least a good number of learners who actually interacted with our prompts. And I think, how do I think this could or could not change, this could or not change the results of the study? Well, I think a next step or another hypothesis would also to look at the extent of interaction with the video prompts. So we could also take this further and analyze whether the extent of interaction with the video prompts have an effect on learners' performance. So it could be a hypothesis that the more videos, that the more prompt videos that the learners engage in, the better their performance with, compared to learners who do not view as many prompt videos. It could be one way. I also have another idea about enhancing self-regulated learning by allowing learners to choose beforehand. So if learners at the beginning of the course, they have this choice on whether they want, how they want to support. So they can choose whether they want to interact with the videos and be given more information about the videos. And maybe that would also help them in the process of learning. So yeah, so these are just some directions that the studies can actually have in the future. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much for your response. Daria is asking, you wrote that the first limitation of the study is the self-selection bias. The MOOC students in the study had a choice between watching or not watching the SRL prompt videos. What do you think about including SRLQ and SRLQR in the online course video lectures? Perhaps it would allow to overcome the first limitation.
Yeah, this is exactly, you hit the spot, that's correct. Having more than one intervention, comparing more than one intervention allows you to actually look at whether there is a self-selection bias. So we can see that across 3 experiments, the results are not the same. And if, for example, in the question prompt condition, it wasn't as effective in the innovation management MOOC. So it can't be that just because students watch the question prompt condition in the serious gaming MOOC and in the econometrics MOOC, and that's why they are much better. So having 2 conditions allow you to overcome this self-selection bias of, is it just because the learners are more active and they interacted with your prompt and that's why they benefited? But if you have 2 conditions and one condition didn't show that, so it would just sort of like reduce this self-selection bias argument that it could be that the learners are just more active.
Thank you very much. Okay, Natalia is writing, Jacqueline, thank you. In article, you wrote that at the point of enrollment, learners in all three conditions received a general message that informed them that the course version they were enrolled in would be used to investigate learning in MOOCs. Were the participants who withdrew from the experiment or disagreed with enrollment in the experiment group after such message? What did you do in such cases? And did you consider the announcement of an experiment before enrollment for learners?
Yeah, okay. We didn't look at whether there was a higher withdrawal because I think in general, the general message was to inform them. I think practically is to inform them that this is different from the original version and we have additional materials in this MOOC. So yeah, so we didn't exactly look at whether learners actually disagreed with the enrollment message and they left after that. So, and did I consider the announcement of the experiment before enrollment for learners? Which is why I think we want to inform learners before in each version that this is what we are doing. And Coursera collects data regardless of whether there is an experiment. So the trace data is actually anonymized and retrieved from the Coursera platform in order for us to look at learners who, so I think we only look at the data of learners who are active. We compared active learners, so learners who actually started at least one course activity, and that's where the analysis starts. So we didn't actually look at learners who enrolled and didn't do anything with it, because that's really common in MOOCs. Like if they start enrollment and they don't even start the first course activity. So we didn't look at all the other possibility of learners withdrawing and not interacting with the experiment.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Natalia, your question is, thank you for presenting the interesting research. And the first question is there any possibility to separate the effect of SRL prompts videos and any other kinds of prompts videos, for example, about planning, monitoring, and reflecting in general, not just in learning activities? I mean, maybe the effect is caused by the fact of prompts existence, not by the meaning of prompts. So a student feels some kind of attention and care towards him and tries to perform better, meet expectations. And the second question, is there any opportunity that positive effect of SRL prompts was due to perceived attention to the learner in general? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer question 2 first. I don't think it's due to the perceived attention of the learners in general, because we didn't really find much effect in innovation management MOOCs. And if it's just because we have an additional video that draws their attention to our learning process, then there would be a general effect even in the innovation management MOOC. Yeah, then for the first question, if we can separate the effect of the self-regulated learning prompt videos and other kind of prompts, I think that would be quite distracting for learners if it's not related to learning, because they are in the learning platform and if you're prompting them. So I think what we want them to do is to actually really focus on the learning process and direct their attention to the current state of learning, because it's easy to have this go into this binge watching mode without comprehending. So I think the idea was to actually take learners out from this binge watching kind of environment and set the stage for them to think about their current learning process and set them up for success, so they can get ready to think about what they need to do, because it's self-regulated learning. We do not want to be an external regulation. We want learners to use they are adult learners in higher education as well. So they would have certain strategies that they are already using that they think would be beneficial for them. So the idea of the study is really just to give this hint or this nudge along the way to tell them to think about what they're doing right now, rather than just to tell them to just a general prompt, I think. Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
yeah
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The next two questions from Vladimir. The first one is, what kind of effect SRL prompts will demonstrate on courses with different type of assignments? For instance, courses with peer review assignments, maths, programming, or tests. And the second question is, should prompts adapt to the courses with predominant type of assignments? For instance, prompts for courses with a large number of math assignments should differ from courses predominantly programming tasks.
Okay, this is an interesting question to think about as well, whether the prompts and has a differential effect depending on the type of assignments. I would say that it would be for future research as well. And yeah, so I think not only that, so different types of assessments. So we are looking at peer review and automated quiz, right? Whether self-regulated learning prompts would demonstrate different kind of effect on these two types of this. Yeah, so it will be interesting to look at, I mean, over here, I don't have a MOOC that just have automated quiz, but we do have a MOOC that only has peer review assignments. And it seems like it was effective in the MOOC that has peer review assignments. So if we compare this MOOC and a MOOC that just have automated quiz, probably the effect might be less, because in automated quiz, learners could just, if they could use the automated quiz as a form of testing as well, more than just a graded assignment. So I'm not sure whether the effort that they need to complete the assignment is, they need to be as self-regulated as a learner who needs to complete peer review assignments. So this would definitely be worth exploring in the future on courses with different types of format of assignments. And the next point is actually with math assignments and programming assignments. So the different types of domain in that sense, I would say, right? I mean, if we are looking at that, it could be that the prompts would have to be adapted to the domain, because you might want to prompt certain learning strategies that will be more effective for programming than for, let's say, serious gaming. So maybe in programming, it's more of application, more of practice, whereas in serious gaming, it's more of like, maybe there are some recall of certain concepts that you would have to use. So maybe you need to, maybe self-explanation will be more useful in serious gaming MOOC than in programming assignments. So that, yeah, so it could be that the prompts should be adapted to the courses to enhance the effect of these prompts.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the last question, not last, because I have one more question. Mm-hmm. Okay, the last question in our chat from Grigory. So, not the last. Okay, I read your last. I read your article, and they have a question. Table number of SRL prompt video watched. Table 2 from article shows the total number of video views per week. Have users watched? It was a question. Have users watched the video to the end? And what if on all weeks the same person watched videos and you end up counting them several times in the final total of views?
Yeah, so they are the unique counts. So it's so we do not overlap. Like, so if they watch like video 3 a few times, we actually do not. So that's only counted as once. So we are counting the number of SLR prompt views, the videos that were watched by how many learners per week, if that's the table that you're referring to. And yes, it's based on the Coursera data in which learners finish the video.
Okay, Thank you. And Irina is asking, thank you for the presentation. Are these MOOCs paid or free, or just course certificates are paid?
Yeah, so just for course certification. So learners would have to pay for a small fee if they want to get a course certification, but they can access the course materials for free.
Okay, thank you so much. So my question is, first of all, I liked very much the idea and what you did with process mining in your and these results. And what I want to say that from my point of view, we get this huge amount of information from process mining, but it is like as it is. So we see we can compare different kind of like clusters or like typical processes of interaction or engagement. But what I want to say that, for instance, when we analyze traffic on roads or kinds of situations in which we don't need to understand the reason of different kinds of clusters, we just need to see, okay, we have these different types of interactions, and as it is, and it is enough for us because we just can use this information for like for further decisions. But in education, it is very, like, it is critical, I think. Maybe you disagree with me, but just my idea is that in education, it is critical to understand the reasons behind these differences between these clusters. Probably you already have thought about this problem, and maybe you can share your strategies, how we can get and how we can go further in explanation of these differences in these like process clusters.
Yeah, definitely, Dimitri. I think we are all thinking of the same problem that you've just mentioned, right? I mean, reasons and motivations behind these sequences actually gives these sequences the meaning. So if we were to assume that these sequences are not at random, then what does it mean when learners move from one week to another week? What are they doing? Like, so what does it mean that when they watch a video, they go to the quiz and they go back to the video again? Does it mean that they are actually, what form of, how would you label this? Like, does it mean that they are monitoring, or does it mean that they are reflecting, or does it mean that they are just testing themselves? So I think the strategy that I would actually take next is actually to have a mixed method kind of research in which we look at what learners actually do in an online environment, and also couple it with interview to better understand, or even ask learners to reflect on what exactly they're doing. So it's, for example, like eye tracking research in the past, in which they really record down, okay, you're reading a passage, so you're moving from left to right and downwards, and this is your performance. So I think you have to triangulate multiple forms of data, right? You have to look at performance as well, and you have to look at the trace and as well as the reason behind it. So, and the reason behind it could only be better understood by asking learners themselves.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree. Thank you very much for sharing these thoughts, because yeah, I think that the problem when we so when education became digital, it was like very tempting to use all this data and typically like to use these different kinds of machine learning procedures, which quite not interpretable and explainable, but just saying us what I want to say, like the situation as it is. And without involving into further analysis the contextual variables, the feedback, like real feedback of learners, or maybe interviewing learners or some other kinds of data, we cannot rely on this on these findings. And I like very much that you're thinking about it. And yeah, I liked your paper very much. Thank you so much for you. Thank you and your supervisors and team members for this wonderful research. Okay, and we are coming to concluding remarks. I think that we are on time. Thank you very much for, first of all, thank you, Jacqueline, for your amazing presentation. And thank all of the audience for a lot of questions, interesting questions. Our short announcement. Our next seminar will be next month, exactly in January 25. And we have the study from Dr. Ji-Yun Lee and her supervisor, Professor Mimi Recker, from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute from the United States of America. And the topic will be the effects of instructors' use of online discussions strategies on student participation and performance in university online introductory mathematical courses. So this talk will be based on the paper published in Computers and Education journal. So that is all for today, and I would like to ask all the audience to unmute themselves and join me in warm applauses to Jacqueline for her great presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, and Jacqueline, maybe you have some concluding thoughts from you after the seminar. Please, you can share.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the questions. I think they are really worthwhile to go deeper and to think deeper. And I think this is really a nice opportunity. This space that where we can discuss all these questions really shows that this field can come together. And I think I'm from an educational psychologist background. And when I first started with investigating how can we optimize online environment, I realized that this is not just one person's job that can be done, but it has to be a collaboration with a team. So we worked with like computer scientists, we also worked with statisticians to try to understand how best can we analyze the data. So as Dimitri, you have put it right, I mean, the data is just out there and we have so many data and we can do so many different things with it. Like one of the questions, like how do you actually select what do you want to measure? And which is why I think I've started a presentation talking about theory. And I think data is informative for us to actually reiterate and try to understand what does theory tell us and whether do we need new theory to explain whether self-regulated learning in an online environment has a different would be manifested in a different form. So yeah, I hope that we can take these conversations further and email me if you have any questions, or yeah, if you would just really like to discuss a bit further on how do you conduct experiments in MOOCs and what you need to do in MOOCs, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, great. I think, thank you so much. And it would be a great opportunity because Higher School of Economics has also a lot of courses on Coursera. And I think it was also the reason why it were a lot of questions, like technical questions on how you plan the experiment, how you on all these stages of planning and making the research. So, and I think I'm pretty sure it would be great, a great collaboration in future. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I'm looking forward to see you next month on our next seminar. Thank you, Jacqueline, again. And have a nice the rest of week and have a nice weekend and stay healthy and stay happy.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.